What's up, guys? Oh, I still need to fix this up properly because usually my co-host does it. All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to 0xResearch. Today, I'm joined by the lovely Carlos and Ben, who is the CEO and co-founder at Harmonic. Ben, thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Happy to be on. It's like talk about what we built. Pretty excited.
Very good. Before we get started, do you want to give a short intro on yourself and on Harmonic, and then we can get a bit more in depth?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So for those that don't know me, I'm Ben. I've been in this long ecosystem for almost 5 years at this point. Time flies. My background's all like math, CS, HFT, stuff like that. During my time in school in HFT, really fell in love with DeFi. It's, I really believe that DeFi is decentralized finance in general is technology that will make markets more efficient and better for everyone. And then of course, one thing that efficient markets need, or one thing that capital markets need, is infrastructure for internet capital markets, and that's Harmonic. This is kind of what we built on Solana. Think of it as an open block building marketplace for Solana. It's very open and competitive, right? So for background on those that aren't as familiar with Solana as a network, right, is the backbone of Solana is a bunch of validators, a bunch of leaders, right? These are the guys that are responsible for basically the entire network, right? And there's a little less than 1,000 now of them all over the world. And one of the hardest things they have to do is hack blocks, right? So they're in charge of ingesting transactions from all over the world, sequencing those transactions, broadcasting them out to the network. And there's a recent increasing demand for like the outsourcing of this block building, right? There are many validators now that are now saying, hey, I want more sophisticated entities to build my blocks for me, and this can be for a variety of reasons, right? One is applications or application control execution, right? As sequencing applications a specific way to their preferences. Another obvious thing that validators want is more revenue, right? Sophisticated block builders are generally going to be able to hack blocks more efficiently and earn more revenue than the default becomes shipped inside the client. And then like the third, I think, main group of customers for this product, of course, are the users of the chain, right? There's a lot of native sequencing behavior that we've seen going on in Solana in the past, right? It's no secret that we struggled with this in the past. Users, they want more control over how their transaction flow is handled, right? I, as a user, want to say, hey, I want to submit my transaction to Helios or Temporal or someone who I know is not going to sandwich me, and someone who I know is going to handle my transaction responsibly. It's in a trusted manner, right? Right now, I kind of have to broadcast my transaction out of the whole network and play this kind of cat and mouse game of sandwiching and net and all this other stuff. So I think the best way to describe Harmonic is it's a system that not only increases revenue for validators and creates value for applications, but also bridges this incentive gap between applications and users.
That's an awesome overview. I think there's a lot to unpack here. I think people are mostly familiar with Jito's block engine today. I think one of the main questions people have is Harmonic competitive with Jito, or how is it different from Jito?
Yeah. So Jito's traditional product, right, is their block engine, which is kind of basically it's an auction that creates a bunch of bundles, right, which instead of full blocks, they kind of send bundles to the validators. Then their new product is this thing, right, which is full block building. Harmonic is different because it creates a competitive marketplace, right? So with any individual system, you're basically completely vendor locked into one builder, or let's say something, right? Harmonic is an open marketplace of block builders, right? Like instead of only receiving blocks from one entity, I can receive blocks from as many entities as I want, right? And so that's like pretty important, right, for a few reasons, right? So one is, like, in different scenarios, different block builders are going to have different edge. They're probably going to generate more revenue in different scenarios. And as a validator, I want the best revenue in every scenario. The second is for all of the features that applications and users want. If you have 10, 20, 30 plus these block builders that are all innovating on features for applications, and that are all competing to give users the best execution experience and the best sequencing experience, the end result is probably that we're going to have a much better world, or the end result is that the world is going to be much better for users and applications. I think that one of the things that I really appreciate about Solana, and like I have appreciated about Solana over like the last few years, is every single layer of the stack, you have a lot of good teams attacking it, right? Say like borrow lend or marketing, like look how spread or look how high spreads are with these prop payments, right? Perks. When you have more teams attacking the vertical on Solana, it's going to make that vertical better for everyone, right? Competition keeps people honest, it pushes people forward, and it forces us to all innovate and to create better products. It's like the place where we can really see competition missing is this block building layer, right? I think Gito's a good team, right? I think that like if they want, I hope they do. Gito's going to be able to build blocks on Harmonic, right? And users that only want blocks from Gito, or like they already have the option to only take blocks from Gito, right? Either by pointing directly to Gito's command, right? Or they could do that through Harmonic too and say, hey, I only want blocks from Gito, right? This is just opening up optionality to validators that want, right? Like if you only want blocks from one entity, like that's fine, right? A lot of validators don't. A lot of validators want blocks from a lot of different entities. A lot of validators want to maximize revenue in every situation, right? A lot of validators believe that having more folks attacking this layer will result in a better experience for applications and for users, right?
One thing you kind of touched upon in your introduction is this idea of like applications being involved in the block building process. Can you expand a bit on how that works and why it would be beneficial for Solana?
Yeah. So when you only have one block builder, right, that block builder is probably not going to be good in every scenario, right? So what I mean by that, right, is every block builder kind of has their own specialties, right? Maybe some block builders are good at generating a lot of revenue in certain scenarios, and some other block builders are good at generating revenue in other scenarios. And I, as a validator, want the best block in every scenario, right? And Harmonic allows us to do that pretty seamlessly, right? Because it's think of it as kind of like a block auction, right? Where everyone submits their blocks, right? And the block that aligns with the validator's preferences, for example, revenue, is selected, right? And then the other thing is there's kind of an incentive, right? Is validators are, if in a completely selfish short-term world, a validator is incentivized to, behave extractively, right? Harmonic bridges this incentive gap in a few ways. Right? Like one is obviously there's a lot of rules that you have to follow as a block builder system, right? Like you obviously cannot sandwich people, right? You obviously have to follow these ACE rules, right? So applications can essentially declare ACE rules, right? They say, hey, I want my transactions to be sequenced a specific way. Block builders cannot violate these rules. They have to abide by these ACE rules, and they compete on throughput, right? So if you have one builder that in the future is cranking out 100K, a million plus TPS, right? That block builder is probably going to win more right? Because in this future world where we have several thriving perp dexes on Solana, as market making and all these orbital updates get even more competitive, you want block builders that are cranking out 100K plus, like a million TPS, right? Like, Onset and Firedancer are really great teams, right? These guys, I totally believe can scale a network to 1 million plus TPS. We need a fast 1 million TPS builder marketplace that scales with it. We need fast 1 million TPS base that scales with it, right? And look, I mean, like the out-of-box schedulers are good, right? There are sophisticated block builders out there that have proven they can be better, and that has just created an immense amount of demand for a system like this that, again, allows validators to receive these blocks, but in a way that is not harmful to the user or application experience.
Great. I had a couple of questions that just to follow up with that. Like, I think in the race announcement, you mentioned that Solana has a need that is currently not being met, like for many applications. One clear example of this is like perps dexes on Solana, which have a clear structural disadvantage, like when it comes to like market maker cancels. You touched briefly on that, but I was just curious on like how you view Jito BAM and how this plays like into Harmonic's value proposition. From what you've been describing so far, it seems like you are creating a more competitive block building marketplace and giving back like the power or control to the validators and applications to have like the most specific control over their transaction sequencing. I'm just like, curious on your views of BAM and how it can help or how it evolves in the Solana ecosystem going forward.
Yeah, look, again, I think Jito's a good team. I think they've traditionally done a lot in the past to push the network forward. That said, I think there's also kind of a big hole market here, right? There's no competition in the block building layer, right? There's no multiple teams that are all keeping each other honest, and validators don't have any optionality, right? So I guess you mentioned a few things, right? One is perps, right? I want us to get to a world where we do 100K, a million plus per TPS, right? We are much more likely to get there and have the best age experience for applications, right? If we have several good teams attacking this layer instead of just one, right? I think in almost every vertical, right, we've seen how competition creates better, faster, and lower latency markets, right? Again, a great example of this is these prop AMs, right? The cheapest way to buy Sol right now is on Solana for retail, right? Retail can send their stables to Solana. They can swap to Sol from stables. Their average fill is probably going to be like a few bits, if that, right? Which is an order of magnitude lower than the fees that you pay on any centralized exchange. That's pretty cool, right? This is the result of open and fair competition.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, Ben and I spoke at Permissionless this year, and he had this view that prop AMMs can actually be a superior model to order books to provide like the deepest liquidity and tighter spreads in Solana DeFi. Then, like, I would love if you could like walk us through your thesis basically on like prop AMMs as a superior mechanism to prop AMMs as a superior mechanism to order books, like for DeFi systems.
Yeah. So look, like the key intuition, right, is that clubs were built for a world where everyone is co-located and where latency is zero. A decentralized network means validators are spread all over the world, right? Like what's your, average ping like over the open internet, like to and from Europe and Tokyo, maybe like 220 milliseconds or so, right? And then, over really fast infrastructure like 0.0, right? Even though you're going to have direct fiber lines between, say Europe and Tokyo, you're bottlenecked at the speed of light, right? The speed of light is too slow, right? Like 140 millisecond round trip time, between Tokyo and Europe, right? Like that is going to cause trouble for, makers that are trying to coordinate across both regions, right? I as a maker need to post orders to, both this validator in Europe and this other validator in Tokyo. Prop AMMs solve this problem by running a lot of their logic on chain, right? For example, right, one thing that you want to do as a market maker is you want to react to orders that hit you, right? When your logic is running on chain, you can react instantly, right? Because on chain is as real time as you can get, right? However, when you are on a club, right, first I have to read that data from the network, right? So it gets broadcasted out, fanned out through Turbine, right? And then I got to submit it all the way back to the block builder / validator, and it's going to be pretty delayed, right? So, I think this trend of makers and markets running more and more and more on chain is really exciting, right? And I think that Solana is the best chain for this to happen, right? Like the throughput that we've seen on Solana is insane, right? And we're really only scratching the surface, right? Like you may have seen, just like a few months ago, KV on our team put out like 100K TPS block or just like something like incredible, right? And like this is again just scratching the surface, right? Like having these prop AMMs, blasting so many Oracle updates out to the network, right? Like this like wouldn't be possible on a lower throughput chain, right? And Harmonic is also going to be pushing throughput even further, right? Because now I'll have a whole bunch of block builders, each with their own specialties, right? And each with really cool tech, and these guys are going to be competing to pack the most Oracle updates and to fit the most Oracle updates into the blocks, right? Because they earn more fees, right? And like as a result, throughput is going to go up, right? And then TPS will be able to scale, right? Again, OnZen FireDancer, I completely believe that these guys are going to push TPS, and network capacity into 1 million plus TPS in the future, right? We've made extremely good progress, right? And again, there is demand for a builder market that scales with that, right? We need to push Solana into 100K, 1 million plus TPS territory, right? All of these Oracle updates, like if you just look at the chain, like like Solfi, Humidify, Tessera, like all these guys they're blasting so many Oracle updates to the chain, right? And like again, there's naturally demand for a high throughput block packing system to accommodate this demand.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, go ahead, Buck.
We've kind of danced around this a bit. I think both you and Carlos are a lot more clued in on it. Can you just explain to me, like I'm very, very stupid, how blocks are built such that they're more efficient and how a block builder can compete with another block builder?
So it's a really, really hard problem, right? So, like let's say you just have a bag, of just say like 100,000 transactions, right? Lots of them are garbage and, invalid and worthless. Lots of them have hidden value, right? And then a whole bunch of them conflict with each other. Others don't conflict with each other, right? Different transactions take different amounts of time to execute. They all touch different state, right? It's extremely complex, right? And so when you have a really complex problem, it requires a very elaborate and intricate solution, right? So like this is like in the CS world, a problem we call NP hard, right? Because there's not really any, polynomial time, known optimal solution for this problem. So instead you have to make a really good approximation, right? And, different block builders are going to have different approximations. They're going to have different strategies, right? And in certain scenarios, different strategies are probably going to be better than others, right? I think that if you have such a complicated bag of transactions that touch so many different accounts, touch so much different state, some have hidden fees, some don't. And the other thing is that some transactions might have more value to certain block builders than others, right? And so you kind of throw, all this really complicated stuff together, you get this really, really hard problem, right? And this is a problem that is definitely much better tackled by dozens of block builders than just one, right? The hardest problems in the world, right, are solved by, generally several teams all around the world, other than just one, right? Like for example, think like all of this AI stuff that's going on, right? Like you have a few big AI labs, that are kind of rising up, right? And each kind of has their own niches, and each kind of has their own specialties, right? I don't think any certain chatbot or anything like that is always going to be the best in every single scenario. And again, the other thing is this fierce competition between these labs, has again pushed the technology forward in ways that I don't really think would have been possible otherwise.
That makes sense. Carlos, do you want to go ahead now?
Yeah, sure. I have a question regarding Solana's evolution. It seems like block building to some extent rises because of Solana's inefficiencies at the microstructure level. And so it seems like increasingly over the past few months, Solana microstructure has favored priority fees as opposed to JITA tips or other types of MEV inclusion mechanisms, if that makes sense. So if you look at the real economic value chart, for instance, you see the divide between priority fees and JITA tips, right? A few months ago, JITA tips represented most of that. Whereas if you see the evolution over time, the market is increasingly preferring priority fees, with priority fees taking a higher share of that, if that makes sense. So kind of my question to you is as Solana becomes more efficient, why do we need these block builders? Why are priority fees not sufficient enough? It seems like MEV providers or block builders are increasingly competing for a much smaller share of the pie.
Right. So there's a few things here, right? And it's one, as even as priority fees become more and more important, right? You still want to maximize your priority fees, and that still requires sifting through hundreds of thousands of garbage transactions, which requires extremely high throughput, efficient infrastructure, right? Try doing 100K, even a million, ED 25519, sig verifies a second, right? Thank God we have very smart teams like FireDancer that have done a ton of work in this field and are really working to scale this throughput up to these levels, right? But then even then, right, I need to determine whether or not it's spam. I need to determine whether or not it's executable, right? The average out-of-the-box scheduler is not the best at this problem, and this has been proven, right? We've written custom schedulers. I'm sure other teams have written custom schedulers that do better than the baseline, that do better than the default. As institutional adoption continues to increase on Solana, right? Shout out for the first actual Solana ETF that we have, right? I think the Bitwise ETF went live just 2 weeks ago or something, right? And with this increasing institutional adoption, there's going to be a natural demand for yield, right? And being able to sift through, all these garbage transactions, being able to pack them in the order that is optimal is going to become increasingly important, right? Because you mentioned that, priority fees have fallen off, right? I believe we need to grow the pie, right? And we're going to do this through a few ways, right? One is obviously Harmonic has integrated ACE. This is going to create value for applications. This is going to enable us to build in the future 1 million TPS perp decks on Solana, right? A lot of the infrastructure for this already exists, right? We are just a piece of that puzzle, right? We're going to implement ACE, right? We're going to create a builder market, of builders that are all competing to create the best experience for these perp dexes and their users, right? And the result, right, is that the user experience is going to be better, right? More and more users are going to come into Solana. Solana is going to be the best place to trade perps. I think it's already the best place to trade spot for retail, right? I cannot get better prices on Sol anywhere else as a retail trader, right? And soon I think that'll be true for institutional traders too, right? As demand continues to increase, market makers are going to provide more and more liquidity, right? It's the mindset here has to be growing the pie, right? Yes, we can maximize revenue for validators, but we'll do it in a way that is sustainable to the network and that pushes the network forward and that meets the increasing throughput, low latency, and sequencing demands of applications and their users.
And you mentioned ACE a few times, and specifically with regard to perps. Is this something to do with like not being able to prioritize cancel transactions? Is that why we think?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I have my own opinions on, like what's the best way to build a DEX, right? But like I think overall, I think applications should be able to experiment with anything that they want, right? I think that if they want to do cancel prioritization, they should be able to do it. I think that if they, want to do more of like a FIFO type thing, they should be able to do it, right? Like I think overall we should just give applications maximum optionality, right? And allow them to experiment with different microstructures and allow them to experiment with different sequencing rules and application designs, right? So for those that want to prioritize cancels on Harmonic, they will be able to do it, right? And like also to that point, I think one of the other things that's driven Solana forward so quickly on spot, right, is that all of these market makers, DEXs, application developers, etc., have all been able to experiment with new market structures extremely quickly, right? Like the CeFi world is bogged down in regulation. There's a very high barrier to entry, right? Like, I can't just make a prop AMM and like ship it to NYSE, right? I just can't do that, right? And like, I also maybe don't need to, right? Because on a centralized exchange, latency is 0, right? However, like again, in DeFi world, right? I can just ship a prop in like a week, right? I can ship a new DEX really, really quickly, right? And just being able to permissionlessly iterate on application design and just to permissionlessly just publish new apps and accrue users to those apps and just to immediately compete on liquidity with all the other great market makers on Solana is pretty cool, right? And I think that's a huge reason why Solana's winning on spot fills for retail trades on majors today.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Like, I feel you're one of the persons who understands prop AMMs most, like, better than most people. Like, I have a question, it may be stupid, but do you think prop AMMs could potentially enable perps? Like,
Yeah,
instead of
yeah.
just using, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do, right? So, I mean, look, like perps are really hard, right? Like to preface, right? There's a lot of different components you have to deal with, right? Matching engine is just one, right? And I absolutely think you can implement a matching engine that involves prop AMMs, right? There's many ways to do it. I would absolutely love to build this, like, in the future, right? Like our team was, jamming on designs for like perp dexes a while back, just really just for fun, right? We were kind of thinking to ourselves, how do we make this better? And like one of the things that we came up with was kind of like a prop AMM based matching engine. But there's also a lot of other hard things that you have to do, right? I think risk is extremely hard to get right? Like I think when there's a huge market move, right, all of the responsibility falls on you and your risk engine to make sure none of your users go underwater. And it's a really, really hard problem, right? And so like I think that prop AMMs will definitely make matching better on perps, but I think that alone is not sufficient, right? Like you also need a really good risk engine. But just in terms of like getting the best fills on Solana, I do think a prop AMM based approach would be better than anything that exists today, for the reason of like that latency for makers to react to trades being 0.
This is a dumb question, but do you think there's any issue with Oracle reliance to sexes when you're running a prop AMM? Like
So I mean, like different assets have price discovery in like different places, right? So like for example, for an asset like Bitcoin, right? A lot of the majority of the trading still happens on Binance right now. We will change this in the future, right? But for now, the majority of the trading happens on Binance, right? So for traders and for like sophisticated market makers, this is important, right? Because these guys are constantly trying to predict where the price is going to go, right? And the majority of that signal value for where is the price going to go, right, originates on Binance, right? Now this will change, right? Like as we continue to push throughput higher, right? With Harmonic and with Firedancer and with all the perf improvements that Agave's been making, right? Like again, like we're going to get more and more transactions on Solana, and I think more and more spot volume will move to Solana. But yeah, like I think it's kind of the responsibility of each individual prop AMM to create their own signals, right? And to create their own Oracle pipelines, right? Like I cannot just use a Pyth Oracle and be competitive, right? The best market makers in the world have sophisticated models that they essentially predict short-term, sometimes even long-term price movements, right? So each prop AMM is probably going to have their in-house kind of like Oracle updater, right? One of the things that I think will be interesting is when we start seeing price discovery for assets on chain, right? Like when price discovery for assets is happening on chain and the majority of volume for assets is on chain, you might have people like running actual machine learning models on chain and like actually running a lot of these sophisticated models on chain, which I'm really, really excited about because you're going to enable all of this sophisticated modeling, but also with Solana's extremely high throughput and composability.
One kind of unrelated follow-up. In terms of Harmonic, when you think of like who your main customer is it the application? Is it the block builder? Or is it like...
Yeah. So I'd say ultimately, right, like it's the users of the chain, right? Like the users of the chain are the ultimate customers of every single application, right? They're the customers of every validator, right? These are the people that are paying fees to both the applications and the validators, right? Like to be clear, I think the applications are, also a really, really important customer. And I think the validators are also a really important customer, right? Like I think overall, our main priority for us is making sure that users have the best on-chain experience. And it's like oftentimes that also means, making sure applications have the best on-chain experience. One of the things that we did as we were building Nozomi, right, is, we fiercely, communicated with all these applications. We're constantly asking them what they want, and we're implementing those features for them. And this has just resulted in, adoption beyond what I could have even imagined, right? And, for Harmonic, we're going to do the same thing. I think we are going to have the best customer service for users and for applications. I think that, really once we launch this thing and gain significant market share, like a lot of my job is just going to be talk to users, talk to applications, improve the product, talk to users, talk to applications, improve the product, right? And for validators too, right? As like validators are the ones that are actually running this thing. It's, our job to bridge this incentive gap again between the validators, applications, and the users, right? So, we're also going to be fiercely communicating with validators, asking them what they want, asking them what they want to see, and improving the product, right? Our job is to give the apps, users, and validators what they need, but in a way that is sustainable for the network, in a way that will push throughput, to 1 million plus TPS for ACE included, and like again in a way that will result in the best, application and user experience.
Last question, Carlos, and I'm gonna let you. So Solana had a few very interesting governance proposals over the past few years. Is there any that you were very, very against? That you were like,
yeah. There are definitely some that I was against, right? There was one called PRA a long time ago. This was like back in like 2022 that this was being pushed. There's like paid application rebatable account right fees. So the long complicated name. Long complicated name for a long overcomplicated SIMD. The idea of this SIMD was to give applications more control, which I think is really, really good. I think that's a really big thing that Harmonic is doing, right? I think we're giving applications more control, right? The problem is that the way that this SIMD wanted to give applications more control made the protocol really, really overcomplicated. It would have delayed timelines for FireDancer a lot. It probably would have delayed timelines for Agave, and it just overall introduced a lot of overhead and accounting to the protocol, which is already pretty complicated, right? Like I think that we should continue to simplify the protocol as much as we possibly can, standardize it, document it, right? Create the best foundation to iterate, right? So, like the SIMDs I tend to like are SIMDs that simplify the protocol a lot. Like for example, we've seen some SIMDs to reduce certain constraints on transactions being processed. That's great. There's a recent SIMD that puts priority fees and compute units in the header of the transaction. So now I don't have to parse through 100 transactions just to figure out what is the priority fee of this transaction or what is it worth, right? It's like the kind of SIMDs I tend to like and that we generally kind of tend to like at Temporal are, SIMDs that push throughput forward, SIMDs that simplify the protocol, right? Now, this isn't true in every case, right? Like I think for, things like, MCP, right? And, features that, you could argue add complexity, right? Like I'm not saying that they necessarily do, but like some people might argue that they do, right? Like I think there's trade-offs that should be discussed with changes like this.
Yeah, that totally makes a ton of sense. You mentioned a lot of upgrades like that are coming to Solana that can potentially increase throughput by 100x, by 10x. Like you mentioned Fire Dancer. I don't know if you mentioned Alpenglow, but
Yep.
one protocol that you haven't mentioned yet, which I am curious if you see any impacts on, is 0xResearch and
Yeah.
how you think it plays out into this future.
Yeah, look, I mean, anyone that has ever, done, HFT or, done like extremely high throughput over the public internet knows that the public internet leaves a lot to be desired, right? So, I had a lot of experience with this, during my time at HFT. We had a lot of experience with this building Nozomi. You send stuff over the public internet, the jitter's crazy. Sometimes your packets just randomly get dropped, right? Sometimes it just takes a super weird route. Like sometimes I want to send a packet from, maybe Amsterdam to Frankfurt, and like it'll route me through, the US for some reason, right? The public internet has a lot of quirks, right? We need to, we need the IBRL, right? We need to increase bandwidth, and we need to reduce latency. And I think 0xResearch is a fantastic effort at doing this. I think they're a really, really great team. Andrew, Matteo, and Austin, are all really, really smart. And I think they've built a phenomenal team. And I think that the work they've done is really, really important for pushing Solana again to this like 1 million plus DPS. And we would love to, figure out a way to put Harmonic on 0xResearch, right? Like we've done a lot of testing, and they are improving. They are improving a lot of the routes, right? And the bandwidth continues to go up, right? And I think they're going to continue to iterate on their product. And I think, look, like the end result is going to be we increase bandwidth and reduce latency.
Very good. I kind of jumping a little bit back, you very diplomatically said you care about the applications, the users, and the validators, which I think is the correct stance to take in public. But these three have incentive misalignments, I imagine.
Yep, correct. Yeah, no, they do, right? And it's like, again, like as I mentioned, it's like initially it's our job to solve this misalignment, right? Like it's our job to be that intermediary between the applications, the users, and the validators, and figure something out that works for everyone, right? So, and like for one, right, like this involves ACE, right? So like instead of validators sandwiching everyone, this is bad. We don't want that. We're not going to allow that on Harmonic, right? Just to be very clear, no sandwiching on this thing, right? Validators that want to do it, they're not going to do it on Harmonic, right? And they're actually going to end up losing out on revenue, right? Because we're giving applications the opportunity to control where their transactions go, to control where their flow goes, right? In a Harmonic world, applications get to choose where their transactions go, right? So if they don't want to send it out to, validators that might sandwich them, they don't have to. Right now, like you're kind of just stuck broadcasting your transaction out to the open network, and, hopefully there's no one that'll sandwich you, right? But like we're building tooling for users to avoid sandwiching, right? We've already built a lot of this tooling with Nozomi as well, right? We've detected hundreds of sandwiching validators, and we've all blacklisted them from Nozomi, and the end result is a lot of them just shut down, right? And as we give users more and more tools for them to be able to control their transactions and to be able to control who sees them, right, sandwiching is gonna plummet, right? The second, right, is like this ACE stuff, right? Like the pie is not fixed, right? Like this max extract sequence applications extracts, or in a way that's maximally extractive, is short term. The applications, they'll form app chains. They'll go to other chains where there's nobody sequencing them in malicious manner, right? Like this is like, again, really, really bad for validators in the long term. And as such, we're not going to allow this. And for those validators that want short-term profits, right, I think there's something to be said about what the correct ACE fee is, right? I think that validators definitely deserve some consideration for their hard work in sequencing these applications the way these applications want and genuinely deserve to be sequenced, right? So by taking this ACE fee, right, we create value for the applications. Validators still earn money. We grow the whole pie.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that I'd like to understand a bit better is Harmonic's business model. It seems like you are improving things for the user, but that also implies, as you mentioned, like you're sacrificing revenue to some extent by allowing user to have like better feels and whatnot. Like, do you charge a take rate for transaction inclusion? Like, how does Harmonic like essentially generate revenue and become a profitable business, like
Yeah,
while
so it's
advocating for the users?
right. Yeah, so it's just fees, right? So like there'll be fees on tips, ACE, and possibly priority fees, right? We're still working out what the correct number is for this. But like what I can say is we're going to grow the pie, right? Like if we take more fees than the validators would otherwise generate, they're not going to use the product, right? We don't expect validators to use the product if we just brought them blind, right? Instead we're going to create lots of value. We're going to grow the pie, right? And in creating this value, we're going to have more and more applications come to Solana, more and more users paying fees to Solana. The end result is the pie grows for everyone, right? And even in the short term, right, there's going to be immediate revenue from applications that say, hey, I have certain rules for how I want you, the validator, to sequence these transactions, and in exchange for these guarantees, I am willing to pay you, the validator, and Harmonic, the system that is facilitating this, some consideration for that hard work.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I guess I have one more question, which is, aside from prop AMMs and perps dexes, what are you excited to see people build on Solana like that we haven't seen before, or do better?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I think that I think that everything will be better, and that everything will continue to get better, as we again push throughput forward, right? And we enable new completely designed space for these applications. Look, I think on the spot front, right, just spot trading, right, I think that prop AMMs were really just scratching the surface, right? I would love to see systems that essentially iterate on this running logic on chain idea, right, and take market structure to the next level, right? I'm hearing that maybe some people are working on things like this, and these things aren't going to be your standard spot dexes or perp dexes. These are going to take this kind of prop AMM market structure and this idea of running logic on chain, and these systems are going to iterate on that logic and take it to the next level in ways that result in better fills than like you could have imagined otherwise. I think I'm really excited to see a lot of the innovation we've seen on the router layer, right? I think that all this on-chain routing stuff is really, really good for users. And I think these users are getting demonstrably better fills, right? I think Oracle infrastructure is another one where I think we've seen a lot of great products, or a lot of great progress, right? And there are a lot of great products, right? And I think that as Oracle infrastructure continues to improve and become more resilient, right, we're going to enable more and more capital inflows on chain, right? Like I think borrow lends are going to continue to get a lot better. The markets are already getting a lot more efficient, right? Like TVL is near an all-time high, right? Revenue is also has been significantly increasing, right? I think that I think borrow lends are really great. I think I'm excited to see more like DePIN stuff, right? I think that look, I think demand for energy has massively been increasing because of this AI boom. I think there's a pretty big DePIN opportunity there. Look, I mean, I think the things I'm most excited for are probably the things that I can't envision, right? That's usually how it is, right? I think overall, let's give people the tools to innovate and to iterate. And I think that we're all going to be pretty surprised at how good this network and its products can be.
I'm also very excited about DePIN. I'm just hoping that we somehow manage to figure out a way to tie how it works together with a token. Feels like it hasn't been figured out yet, but that's what the future is for. I'm sure somebody will figure something out.
Incentive design is really hard.
Yeah. very easy to talk from behind the camera like me and say, "Oh, why haven't you guys figured it out?" Well, I can't.
It's a very hard problem, but I can say I think we've made good progress.
Ben, I guess before we wrap things up, I want to ask you if there's anything that people should be doing. What should they be reading? What should they be visiting to learn more about Harmonic? What do you want people to do?
So we're gonna publish all the docs there very soon. So stay tuned for that. I think podcasts like this are also a great place to go. I think you'll be seeing more of us in public, as we continue to iterate on the product and it continues to gain adoption and we continue to create new features. Any validators, they can reach out to us directly, on Twitter, Slack, whatever it may be, right? I think Twitter is a good start. I mean, we have great relationships with all the validators. They all know how to reach out to us directly. We also have great relationships with all the top applications, right? But for now, I'd say reach out, on Twitter or Slack or, by email, right? We're hello@harmonic.gg. If anyone wants to reach out or get in touch and or has any kind of proposal, and I think we're once we drop the docs, we may do something like a more public venue like Discord. It's still being debated. Kind of just depends on what everyone wants at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, overall, we've seen a lot of excitement across the board from validators and applications alike, and we're really excited to show them what we can do.
Perfect. Carlos, anything you want to end off with? I realize I don't let you talk a lot at the end.
No worries. I mean, incredible email. hello@harmonic.gg.
Get in touch. I mean, anyone that has any interesting proposal or wants to get in touch or chat, anything, we're around. Just shoot us a DM on Twitter or send an email to the email. We'll be pretty responsive.
Perfect. Ben, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Thank you, Ben.